I'm Dane Rose, and I want to talk about the intersection of people, of human beings, and protocols, because I think this is one of the best ways to understand Medicina as a project. And so over here we have the ingredients, or the people. And over here we have the protocol, or the recipe. And then what we have here, what's generated as ingredients and recipes come together, is a probability field. Now, this paradigm is present in every cult, in every culture around the world throughout time. It's present in any group. It's present in any city. There's a protocol, a recipe. Let's throw 10 million people with cars and square lines and high rises into this area, and let's orient them mostly around making and spending money. And you generate a probability field, an emotional probability field, a mental probability field, and a physical probability field. You have a recipe, and you have a demographic of people. Now, there is a connection between the people and the recipe. The recipe changes the people. The recipe changes the ingredients, right? If you have in the recipe, fry this sliced potato for 10 minutes versus fry it for 1 minute, the potato is changed, right? So the potato is changed by the recipe, but the recipe is also selected or changed by the people. And what I mean by that is certain types of people will be attracted to certain types of recipes. And certain types of people lend themselves to certain types of recipes. So there is somewhat of a self-selection process when it comes to the recipe and the people. And so the people, you, me, are the most important thing when it comes to a culture, when it comes to a community, right? Most of us who are intelligent enough to honor felt experience over cultural dogma, right? If you're a cultural dogmatist, you might take the $1 million, right? Without wondering what you would actually feel like in a highly chauvinistic, highly materialistic, greed, fear-oriented culture. But you might believe, right? That's the fantasy. If we could all be rich, we would be happy, despite the stunning amount of data that tells us that 50% of billionaires are miserable, right? The kind of misery you'd find in incredibly poor places. And a tremendous amount of, quote, poor people are quite alive, quite engaged, enjoying life, have close relationships with family. And so despite the stunning amount of data, many dogmatists would pick the $1 million with no regard for culture. But someone who has a little bit more experience would choose living amongst incredible human beings, cooperating, moving towards common goals, common ambitions, over, being the richest person in the world in a vacuous environment without close friendships. The people make the experience, and of course that begins with us. We are the number one influencer on the amount, the quality of our felt well-being in our lives, right? What we think, what we feel about what we think, what we believe, what we feel about what we believe, how we act based on our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, what we say, how much integration there is between what we say, what we think, what we feel. This is, right? This is the most important relationship, and it's the relationship, fortunately, that we have the most influence about. We can improve our relationship with ourselves by iterating, by growing our identity, our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in such a way that is conducive to value, conducive to well-being, right? But there's this wonderful phenomena of synergy, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And when you can combine a good relationship with yourself with a good relationship with others, then you have a true blessing, right? And so one of the questions, because we're dealing with probabilities, whenever you give birth to something new, you're not dealing with actualities. They have not grown. You plant an oak tree, the oak tree has not germinated yet, or it's germinated, but it's not a 300-year oak tree. It's a little seedling, right? And so we have to use critical thinking. We have to use our hearts, minds, and bodies to understand where we're going. But the people are the most important thing. And so the question, obviously if you're making pancakes, right, a delicious recipe, the wheat, the milk, the eggs, the maple syrup, the butter doesn't get to choose whether it gets made into a lump of distasteful bread where there isn't enough water and it didn't get to rise. And, that's the skill of the chef. But with human beings, there is a self-selection process. And what I'm doing in the reading of 700 books on psychology, on relationship, on anthropology, on culture, on business, what I'm doing is filtering, first of all, for competence, right? If you spend time with someone who's devoted their life, devotion, love, who has spent their life loving a certain arena of knowledge, and they've seen patterns emerge out of that lifetime of knowledge, then it is a devotion. It is to love myself, to listen, to learn from the devotion of others who have come before. Right? And so Medicina, the medicine, is a distillation of best practices from the most competent people that I have been able to find into a recipe. Now, a good recipe supports itself, right? And a triangle is a terrific example of a great recipe, right? Because this structure right here is held in place by the intersection of these two lines here, and it goes both ways. This structure here is held in place by the intersection of these lines. And this structure here is held in place by the intersection of these lines. A triangle is a very strong recipe. And when you're looking at bringing together, at synthesizing best practices, when you're synthesizing a variety of different protocols from different sources at different points of time in different areas, what we're looking for is not just a good practice, a practice that has a high probability field in the time and place within which it's used. We're also looking for a practice that will support and strengthen the other practices that are part of the mix. You know, maple syrup tastes incredible on a waffle or rye flour pancake. One of my favorite recipes, a little bit of beer, a little bit of salt, some rye flour and egg, right? Maybe a little bit of baking soda, maybe just relying on the yeast in the beer. And that is so good with maple syrup. But not, maple syrup doesn't go as well on green beans. A little bit, a glazing maybe, but I prefer lemon and garlic on green beans. And so there is a matter of taste, and but a recipe is bringing together different elements in a way that complement and support. Now it's important to understand, in the possibility field, there is an infinite number of different shapes of combinations. There's also personal taste, right? There's preference. And so it's not to say that this structure is for everyone, or even for most people. What it is to say is this is a beautiful recipe, a devotion that is unique, meaning if I was able in any of my travels to find anything like this, I would be there, right? So it's unique because the basis of creating it is that it does not exist. As such, it is an expression of cultural diversity. Now, ecology, nature, life celebrates and loves diversity. No two snowflakes are the same. No two fingerprints are the same, right? No two species are the same. No two plants are the same. No two human beings are the same. Life loves diversity. And of the estimated 10,000 cults or cultures in human history, many more if we count the microcultures, right? No two cultures have ever been the same. So this is a one-off, a one-of-a-kind recipe. And it's a self-selecting, right? It selects for a certain kind of human being. Obviously, a little bit more attention to detail, a little bit more thought than average. Or you don't even get as far as this video. In other words, this protocol selects for thoughtfulness. You become more thoughtful as you enter the recipe, and the recipe selects for more thoughtful people. So all that you and I have to decide is, do we want to live in a culture in which people are 5 times more thoughtful than average, than the status quo? Because it takes 5 times more thought to reflect, to digest, to participate in a recipe of this nature, right? Maybe there's a thought, I'd like to be more thoughtful, but there's a body, I don't want to do that, right? And so whichever one of those prevails, the body prevails, you don't get past the video. If the ambition, if the thought to be more thoughtful prevails, you continue thinking, you continue going in. But the matrix, the recipe, filters for a dramatic increase in thoughtfulness. It also filters for an increase in vision. There's 5 times more vision in a culture, in a picture of this nature than in buy a house somewhere and get a job and see what happens, raise a family maybe, right? Watch some TV. So there's a filter and a recipe of vision. There's a filter and a recipe of ecology, right? This eco-village is 10 times more ecological, more sustainable, meaning it consumes less natural resources per quality of life, per individual, than a standard American, my culture, does. A typical American will consume 102 tons of energy that becomes waste, that becomes garbage. An American sends 102 tons to a landfill in a lifetime. An American creates 1,500 tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. An American spends $400,000 raising a child. An American consumes 90,000 gallons of gasoline directly and indirectly by purchasing things that require that amount of gasoline to be spent in the manufacture and transportation of those things, and in the manufacture and transportation of the things that are needed to make those things, right? So that's a stunning amount of energy that is spent for a relatively low quality of life, right? So to spend 10 times less requires thought. It also requires caring, ecological caring, caring for future generations of ourselves, right? In our dance with our ecology, in our dance with the future, with our grandchildren, right? And so there is a probability field that emerges out of the recipe and the people called to that recipe. There's a probability field that emerges out of that has a higher resonance, more awareness, more beauty, truth, and goodness than the status quo, than the average. And that's what evolution is all about. Evolution is about taking the 1% that made it. And it's useful to remember the ruthlessness of life, so to speak, in deleting 99.9% of everything that could have been so that this can be. the challenge of life that 99.9% of all the species in plant and animal, in culture, are extinct so that we can be here today. And yet, most of us, right, we default in a culture into the average, into the mean of that 1% that made it. We're all part of the 1% that is alive, that is here. And yet evolution is about iterating the protocols that got us here into the protocols that will be part of the 1% that survive. 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, will there be anything today that survives in its current form or in an iterated form? The most intelligent at converting energy into sustainable well-being, that's building the future. That's part of life's plan. To take something the size of a pea 10 to 30 billion years ago, the beginning of the universe, and expand it and iterate it, expand it and iterate it, expand it and iterate it, until trillions upon trillions upon trillions of stars and planets, all trillions of times bigger than that pea, exist today. It's incredible. It's incredible. And so this is about 10x living, creating a 10x life, learning the artistry is about devotion, is about loving the past that brought us here, the present moment in which we have choice to explore a range of probability fields, and the future, the beautiful future, the one that will emerge out of what is here today. And so as you explore the recipe, the protocols, first of all, the recipe of combining them, right? As a designer, as someone that has focused on intelligent design ever since I left high school to 10x my education, ever since I started a landscape design and installation company, ever since I began iterating my own life and relationship with that company, I am a designer. But the data and the inspiration comes from the devotion of others, right? I've never given birth to a baby, but I can watch the best documentaries on pregnancy. I can look at the statistics and wish for my child to have a water birth in a natural environment with medical backup, knowing that just being in that natural environment out of the hospital eliminates much of the trauma of birth and bypasses many of the threats. You know, the third leading cause of death in the United States is complications, which is a polite way of saying when we fucked it up at the hospital, right? When doctors are more addicted than the average demographic, the average population, to the very painkillers and things, when doctors are less healthy, run on more adrenaline than the average population they seek to heal, it's not surprising that that recipe, that the people drawn to that, and the recipe that is a hospital becomes the third leading cause of death, right? Which brings into question, if we had eliminated all of the hospitals, it's a question. If we eliminated all of the hospitals, like if it's crude, right? Because obviously there are many areas where hospitals save an enormous amount of life, but if you look at the third leading cause of death, if you could delete that and take all of the money and spend that money creating parenting courses, creating forests in the desert, creating parks, bonding with our young people, obviously the quality of life would go up. The quality of life as a hospital patient is in the 10% range. And the quality of working in a hospital is in the 10% range. So both the patients and the staff in the patients have a 1 out of 10 quality of life, right? So you get rid of all that, and you create a much higher quality of life. But in 10x design, you don't throw out the good parts of medicine and science, but you seek to recombine them. You take the best of what is and what was. You create new things. You reject the worst of what is. Right? So these are not my statistics and my data points, but they're a design. They're a unique recipe that is designed to bring out a higher level of well-being in you. It's designed to make you taste a little better to yourself and to others, right? So welcome to Medicina, and I invite you to explore the protocols, the many threads that each in their way support the other threads and that draw out the best in human beings.